going on, guys? It's the Entertainment Critic here, and welcome to episode 2 of my Retrospective reviews. This is just a series where I go over Doctor Who episodes from the modern era, so from 2005 to 2017, and after giving them a rewatch after some time, I'm going to give you my thoughts on them after rewatching them, and then I'll quickly touch on the initial thoughts of the episode, and then I'll give you a score out of 10 at the end of the episode. So, in this episode, we're going to be reviewing The Waters of Mars, which is from the 2009 David Tennant special. So, if you guys didn't know, instead of doing a regular 13-episode series, Russell T Davies decided to do, I believe it was 4 or 5 different specials. So, it was Planet of the Dead, The Next Doctor, Waters of Mars, The End of Time, and End of Time Part 2. So, the special that we're going to be reviewing in this episode is Waters of Mars. So, getting straight into it, my initial thoughts on this episode. I watched this such a long time ago. I think I was 9 years old when I first watched this episode, but I was terrified of the main villain, in that being the Flood. Just the concept of them being something that we use in our everyday lives, just taking over, and just there's something like a viral disease or life form living within the water, and it's just taking something that we use every day, something that we use in everyday life, and turn it into a villain, turn it into such a creepy, and just the design of the Flood were so creepy and so frightening so especially when you're like a lot younger. So I think, like I said, I was 9 years old when I first watched this, so to me it was terrifying. Now obviously going back, it isn't as scary. Some parts of it can be scary, and their design is threatening in a way, but just taking water and making it a threat is just genius. I love that concept. Anyway, moving on, I thought it was a good episode when I first watched it. I didn't think it was the best episode, but I didn't think it was a bad episode either. Now, after going back and watching it again, I can safely say I think this is one of the greatest episodes of Doctor Who since the reboot. I love this episode. There's so many good moments in this. All of the side casts are amazing. They each have their moments, just like in Journey's End and The Stolen Earth. Every character in this episode has their own moment, and you really fell for them by the end of the episode. And the way they end up getting killed off, not all of them get killed off, but the way some of them get killed off is really emotional and really well done. So there was one of the female side characters in this. She died. So basically, how the Flood killed you was that if one drop hits you, it infects you and it just takes over your body. So the way this girl died is she was backed into the corner by the water, and she played video of her 2 daughters as she was dying. So she died like whilst watching video of her own family, and that was really well done. That was really Russell T Davies really knew how to pull on your heartstrings in this episode, and he did write this episode. Well, he covered this episode, but his ideas are in this episode, and I really do praise him for that. That was really good. Like I said, the design of the Flood is amazing. They're not over the top. They're not bad. And they're not over the top. They're just there in the middle. I like it. I really like David Tennant's performance in this episode. You can tell without a companion, David Tennant is a really good actor on his own, and he really proves it in this episode. He goes through the motions of being funny. He has serious moments. He has happy moments, sad moments. The full emotional spectrum is shown from David Tennant in this episode, and it is really cool to see. Like, he has moments at the start of the episode where he's just finding out who they are, and she asks him who he is, and he says, Doctor Fun. And that is a comedic moment, but he has the ability to just snap and go back into being serious. And you see that in the last 20 minutes of the episode. That is when this episode picks up. Like, we get moments throughout this episode. It is obviously a special, so it's an hour long, but we get moments throughout this episode where we see like things that could lead up to this, but then in the last 20 minutes it really all comes together. And when we see Adelaide, who I love, Adelaide Brooke in this episode, she is an amazing character. She is strong, independent. She's a really good leader. She's able to make the tough decisions. Like, action 1 was obviously evacuating the base, and then she'd make the decision to blow up the base, and then another decision she makes at the end of the episode really solidifies his characters as one of the best side characters that we've had. Or you can't technically call him a companion for this episode, but one of the best that we've ever had since the show has been rebooted. Moving on, I liked how different parts of the, like, so we had hints, so like throughout the episode, different plot devices, not plot devices, like different things that were used throughout the episode then become bigger in the later part of the episode. So Gadget, which was a silly robot which is just introduced at the start and is a funny way to get the Doctor onto the base, as he finds him outside the TARDIS as he lands on Mars, and the Gadget is then later used. The Doctor obviously juices him up when the Flood are chasing him, and they juice it up and they go, God knows how fast down the path. And I do love throughout this episode how the Doctor is just making hints to Adelaide, because how big the base is, just bikes, just simple bikes. And then obviously Gadget is then obviously later used for opening the TARDIS, getting to the TARDIS and bringing the TARDIS to them. And that is all the part of the last 20 minutes, which I love. The last 20 minutes were probably my favourite parts of the episode, and that comes into like the whole aspect of Time Lord Victorious and the Doctor realising that he thinks that the laws of time are his own to control and bend to his own will, and he finds out the hard way that is not. And one of my favourite parts of this episode was when the Flood, at the end of the episode, when the Flood were knocking on the door, and before this episode, it obviously been set up in Planet of the Dead that the Doctor would die after somebody knocks 4 times, and the Flood knocks 3 times, and the Doctor's just like, 3 knocks is all you're getting, and then electric shocks him. I just love the intensity of David Tennant's acting throughout this episode. It is just amazing. I'm trying to find some flaws in this episode. I really can't. This is probably, like I said, this is the greatest episode of Doctor Who ever made. And I love how he comes full circle, feeling that he can bend the rules of time, and then realizing that he's gone too far by the end of the episode, and it perfectly links into the end of time. Now, I do have my opinions on the end of time, but the way this episode links into the end of time is perfect. I love it. Other things I liked, like I said, sidecast, Yuri. That's the only really sidecast. Adelaide, Yuri and Adelaide really stood out to me as the best characters. There's Gadget as well, who's technically you can call him a side character. He's more of a robot. Obviously we had references to villains that had appeared in the classic era only at that point, so we had references to the Ice Warriors, and the Doctor references the fact that the Ice Warriors must have frozen this virus because they realized how dangerous and potentially deadly it could be, and that is how you do tie-in classic era, and I really did like that. Oh, and this episode had the perfect way of in my previous episode I reviewed, which was Journey's End, into this episode. So, what inspired Adelaide to go out to the stars and try and like reach out to the stars was when she was a young girl, and she was a young girl during the Dalek invasion in Journey's End, and a Dalek flew down and it looked into her, and she looked at it and it flew away. It knew that she was her life is a fixed point in time. It has to happen. So if a Dalek chooses to turn away and not kill her, you can tell how important she is on the timeline, and how even Dalek knew that it couldn't do that. And it really shows the Doctor almost becomes a villain in this episode, because they show the fact that the Dalek didn't want to kill her and it ran away, whereas the Doctor was willing to save her, which kind of puts him in a villainous role in one aspect. And then obviously he does end up saving her and takes her back to Earth. And one of the best parts of this episode, it is really sad, but it is one of the best parts of this episode. Once she takes him back and he gives her the speech of Time Lord Victorious, and that he has the ability to control what happens in time, and he can change fixed points. She tells him that Time Lord Victorious is wrong, and after that she proceeds then to go into her own home, and she takes her own life to set the timeline back in course, kind of. Obviously there's slight alterations, because in the original timeline she died on Mars and now she died on Earth, so yeah, there are slight alterations to the timeline, but she set that back in motion. And I don't know if it would inspire her family still, because what inspired her family to go out to the stars was the fact that she had died, and the Doctor put it one way, it's like her family was trying to go out and meet her, and her dying on Earth, I don't know if it has the same effect. I don't know if it would have the same knock-on effect that it would if she died on Mars. So I'm not even sure if her family ended up going. But obviously, the two other side characters survive, and they tell their stories of what happened on Mars. So that was obviously another change that made to the timeline. And by the ending of this episode, the way that it links into the end of time is we see an Ood appear to the Doctor, and he looks at the Ood and says, "I've gone too far. I know I've gone too far." And the Ood just disappears. And obviously we knew that's a link into the end of time, because the Doctor ends up going to the Ood sphere at the end of time, or planet the Ood, and he then talks to the Ood about the Master in the end of time. So that is how that linked in. Anyway, I'm gonna get onto my overall thoughts of this episode. So overall, like I said, an amazing episode of Doctor Who, probably my favorite episode of Doctor Who ever made, and that is a tough thing to say because there are so many good episodes in the modern era. But this episode has a great side cast, great performance from Dave Tennant. It has a great villain, a villain that is something that we use in our everyday lives. It has a message. It has so much going for it. And if you haven't seen Doctor Who at this point and you want to find an episode to start with, I wouldn't necessarily say start with this episode, but definitely once you get into the show, and if you like the show, watch this episode. It doesn't really have ties. I would watch up to series 4 when the journeys end, because this does have a link in, but other than that, you can watch this episode and not really know much about Doctor Who, but it is one of David Tennant's best performances, and I would highly recommend it. As if you're a fan of David Tennant, this is one of his best performances. So, I would give The Waters of Mars a 10 out of 10 easily. I love this episode, and if you enjoyed the second episode of my retro review series, please do hit that like button. Your support is very much appreciated, and subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.